The sun stands at its highest, ruling the sky with an unchallenged brilliance. The days stretch long, the world hums with energy, and life reaches its peak. Summer is the season of fullness, mastery, and abundance, but also of intensity, excess, and the beginning of inevitable decline. Hidden beneath the golden light is a truth that many overlook: what rises must one day fall. It is a season that teaches us both how to burn brightly and when to prepare for the cooling winds to come. The sun may be at its zenith, but it will not stay there forever. The peak of summer is a time of unrelenting heat, energy, and motion. The sun stands at its highest, drenching the world in golden light, and everything pulses with intensity. Crops ripen in the fields, animals move with vigor, and the air itself seems charged with a kind of raw, unfiltered power. This is the season where life is at its fullest, but also at its most demanding. Ancient civilizations understood summer as a time of both triumph and responsibility. It was celebrated as the season of victory, expansion, and fertility. Yet it was also respected as a period of hard labor, survival, and the looming knowledge that the peak will not last forever. In nearly every culture, summer was associated with fire, the element of passion, transformation, and destruction. Fire is the great catalyst, the force that turns raw material into something new, the energy that fuels growth, but also the power that consumes if left unchecked. The fire of summer is not simply warmth, it is a test, a force that can either be harnessed for greatness or allowed to run wild, leading to ruin. The ancient Greeks honored Helios, the sun god, who rode his golden chariot across the sky, bringing light and life to the world. But they also told the cautionary tale of Phaethon, the reckless son of Helios, who attempted to drive his father's chariot and lost control, setting the earth ablaze. This myth serves as a warning: power without wisdom leads to destruction. Similarly, in Hindu mythology, Surya, the solar deity, represents both life-giving radiance and the scorching force that can dry rivers and wither crops. The Aztecs believed that their world existed under the age of the fifth sun, but they feared the day it would end in fire, consuming all creation in an unstoppable blaze. Summer is a paradox. It is a time of abundance, yet a reminder that nothing stays abundant forever. The very forces that allow life to thrive in summer, the heat, the sun, the fire, are the same forces that, when unchecked, can bring exhaustion, drought, and decline. But this is what makes summer a season of strength. It demands endurance, discipline, and balance. In nature, animals move fast, finding food while it's plentiful, yet conserving energy to survive the harsher months ahead. In human life, summer is the season of action, achievement, and mastery, but it also requires wisdom to know when to push forward and when to prepare for the inevitable cooling winds of autumn. The sun is at its zenith. The fire burns bright. But the wise know that summer's heat is not eternal. It is a gift and a trial, a force that must be harnessed with care. Those who master its lessons will thrive, not just in summer, but in all the seasons to come. Since the earliest days of civilization, humans have gathered to honor the power of the sun at its peak. Summer was never just a season. It was a spiritual event, a cosmic force that demanded recognition. In nearly every ancient culture, midsummer was marked by fire rituals, grand festivals, and rites of strength and renewal. These ceremonies were not merely acts of celebration. They were sacred acknowledgements of the sun's life-giving power and the fleeting nature of its dominance. One of the most famous and enduring of these festivals is Litha, the ancient European celebration of the summer solstice. For the Celts, the Norse, and many pre-Christian societies, the longest day of the year was a time of fire, fertility, and transformation. Bonfires were lit on mountaintops and fields to mirror the power of the sun, symbolizing its strength at its highest point. People leapt over flames to cleanse themselves of misfortune and ensure vitality, believing that fire had the power to purify and renew. The Norse, known for their deep connection to the forces of nature, held midsummer blots, ritual offerings made to the gods. Odin, the All-Father, was honored as the seeker of wisdom, while Freya, the god of fertility and prosperity, was invoked to bless the coming harvest. These ceremonies acknowledged that while summer was a time of strength, it was also a time of preparation, for the light was already beginning its slow retreat. In ancient Rome, the festival of Vestalia, dedicated to Vesta, the goddess of the hearth and sacred flame, took place in early summer. The Vestal Virgins, priestesses charged with maintaining the eternal fire of Rome, opened their temple to the public for a brief time, allowing them to partake in purification rituals that symbolized both personal and communal renewal. The fire they kept burning was not just a symbol of warmth, it was the very essence of life and continuity. Further east, the Slavic cupola night was a summer ritual centered on fire and water, both elements essential to the balance of the season. Fires were lit to drive away dark spirits, and couples jumped over the flames to test their strength and devotion. Meanwhile, rivers and lakes were seen as possessing heightened mystical properties, and participants would bathe in sacred waters to cleanse the soul. This blending of fire and water reflected the duality of summer itself: heat and nourishment, intensity and renewal, strength and surrender. Among the Native American tribes of the Great Plains, the sun dance was one of the most powerful summer rituals, an act of sacrifice, endurance, and connection to the divine. Dancers would fast, enter a trance-like state, and engage in physical trials to test their strength and devotion to the Great Spirit. The ceremony was not about conquest, it was about balance, about recognizing that all power must be tempered with humility and purpose. Throughout the world, these festivals shared a common message. Fire is both a blessing and a trial. The sun is both a giver and a destroyer. Summer is a time of power, but it is also a time to prepare for what comes next. The fires of summer burn bright, illuminating the peak of life's energy. But as every civilization that honored the solstice understood, the highest point is also the turning point. From this moment forward, the sun begins its slow descent, and the journey toward autumn begins. Summer is the season of power. It is the time when the sun dominates the sky, when heat pulses through the land, when the world reaches its peak of life and energy. But hidden within the brilliance of summer is a paradox. What burns the brightest also casts the deepest shadows. Ancient civilizations understood that the sun, for all its life-giving warmth, could also be a force of destruction. A season of growth could just as easily become a season of drought. The same fire that fueled prosperity could consume entire fields in an instant. Just as fire purifies, it also reduces all things to ash. This is the duality of light. When power is unchecked, it turns against itself. The Greeks told the story of Icarus, a boy who, with the gift of waxen wings, soared into the sky. Ignoring warnings, he flew higher and higher, intoxicated by the thrill of ascension, until the sun melted his wings and he plummeted into the sea. His story is not just a cautionary tale, it is the truth of summer itself. The height of power is also the moment where decline begins. Summer is not endless. The solstice, though it marks the longest day, also signals the return of night. The very force that allows summer to thrive also carries the seed of its inevitable downfall. In the Hindu epic, the Mahabharata, the warrior king Duryodhana embodies this theme. He is mighty, ambitious, and at the peak of his power, yet his refusal to yield, his arrogance, and his relentless pursuit of control ultimately led to his downfall. The fire that made him great also consumed him. The Aztecs, too, feared the unchecked power of the sun. While they worshipped Tonatiuh, the solar deity, they also believed that their world, the age of the fifth sun, would end in fire. The flames that had sustained them for centuries would one day grow too great, and all things would be destroyed in the very light they once revered. Even in medieval alchemical traditions, the symbol of the sun was not purely a force of enlightenment, it was also a trial, a test of endurance and wisdom. The process of alchemy involved fire, but fire alone was not enough to transform base metals into gold. The flame had to be carefully controlled, its heat measured, its power tempered. Too much fire, and the entire experiment was ruined. This is the lesson of summer. To burn brightly is a gift, but to burn without caution is to invite ruin. In the natural world, summer is the time when plants grow fullest, when animals move swiftly, when energy is at its highest. But it is also a time when resources must be managed, when water must be conserved. when heat can be as deadly as it is life-giving. In human life, summer represents success, ambition, passion, and intensity. It is the season of building, conquering, and thriving. But just as with the seasons, those who push too far, who refuse to recognize when to slow down, risk exhaustion, burnout, and collapse. Many societies have made the mistake of believing that power is eternal. Empires rise, stretching across continents, convinced that their dominance will never fade. But history proves otherwise. Every great civilization that burned too brightly eventually fell. Rome, at its peak, seemed invincible, yet its own excess, corruption, and overreach led to its decline. The golden ages of Egypt, Greece, and Mesopotamia, all marked by wealth, knowledge, and brilliance, ended when they reached too far, when their fire outgrew their control. The same is true in our personal lives. Summer, both in nature and within us, is a time of power, but power must be handled wisely. There is a difference between using fire to warm and using fire to destroy. There is a difference between thriving and burning out. Those who do not recognize this balance will learn the lesson of Icarus. They will rise too high, only to fall. The sun is a guide, but it is also a warning. It shows us the peak of what is possible, but it reminds us that every peak is followed by a descent. Summer is not endless. Even at the height of its power, the shadows begin to lengthen, and the fire that once gave life begins to consume. Those who understand this truth do not fear the coming of autumn. They know that power, to be sustained, must be balanced. They know that strength is not found in endless burning, but in knowing when to let the fire rest. Fire is the defining element of summer, shaping both the physical world and the inner realms of transformation. It is the force of creation, destruction, and rebirth, the great purifier that tests, refines, and reshapes. Across ancient traditions, fire has been revered as both a divine blessing and a trial, capable of granting wisdom and power, but also capable of consuming all that it touches. In alchemy, the process of transmutation, the attempt to transform base metals into gold, was deeply tied to fire. But this fire was not simply a tool for burning. It was a force of purification, testing, and ultimate transformation. The alchemists believed that just as metal could be purified by heat, so too could the human soul. Fire was the gateway to enlightenment, but only those who could endure it would emerge transformed. The concept of the philosopher's stone, the legendary substance believed to hold the secret of immortality, was rooted in the idea that through fire, a material could be stripped of its impurities and reach its highest form. But this was not just a physical process, it was a spiritual one. The alchemist himself had to undergo trials, just as the metal did, proving his worth before achieving transformation. This idea is reflected in mythologies across the world. The phoenix, the sacred bird that burns in its own flames and rises anew, is the ultimate symbol of summer's fire. It represents both destruction and renewal, showing that fire does not just destroy, it prepares the way for something greater. In Hindu tradition, the god Agni is the messenger of the gods, the divine fire that carries prayers to the heavens. But Agni is not only a force of connection, he is a force of purification, consuming offerings and clearing away the old to make way for the new. This is the essence of summer's fire. It is both a gift and a test. The Celts too saw fire as a sacred force. The festival of Beltane, celebrated at the beginning of summer, was marked by great fires, symbolizing protection, transformation, and the power of the sun. People and animals would pass between the flames in purification rituals, believing that the fire could burn away disease and misfortune, leaving behind only what was strong and vital. But fire is not merely external. It exists within us, as passion, willpower, and energy. In esoteric traditions, this internal fire is known as the divine spark, the hidden flame that must be kindled and mastered. It is the force that drives ambition, fuels desire, and lights the path to self-discovery. However, just as in nature, this fire must be balanced. Too little, and one remains cold, stagnant, unmotivated. Too much, and one is consumed by obsession, rage, or uncontrolled ambition. The alchemists knew that fire was necessary for transformation, but only when controlled and harnessed. This is the great lesson of summer's fire. It teaches us that power, when wielded with wisdom, can bring growth and illumination. But power without restraint leads to destruction. The sun burns brightly, but it does not burn endlessly. Even the hottest fire must one day return to embers. Summer's fire is a gift, but only for those who understand how to use it. At the height of summer, the world seems endless. The days stretch long into the evening, the air is thick with warmth, and life thrives in full force. But even in the brightest moments, something unseen has already begun. The slow turning of the wheel, the quiet shift toward autumn. Though the sun still rules the sky, the balance is beginning to change. The peak of summer is not a place of stillness. It is a threshold, a moment of transition where light begins its slow retreat, even as it seems at its most powerful. Ancient cultures recognized this shift. They understood that summer was not a permanent state, but a fleeting moment, a temporary gift that, like all things, must give way to change. The fire festivals of midsummer were not just celebrations of the sun's strength, they were also acknowledgements that its power was beginning to wane. The summer solstice, the longest day of the year, is also the turning point toward darkness. From that moment on, the days grow shorter, shadows stretch longer, and the cycle begins its descent. In Norse mythology, the god Balder, the Shining One, represents this transition. He is the golden son of Odin, beloved by all, the very embodiment of light, warmth, and life itself. But even Balder cannot escape the cycle. His death at the hands of Loki marks the turning of an age, the first sign that even the greatest light must fade. The Celts believed that the shift from summer to autumn was a sacred handover of power. The god Lugh, the solar warrior, reaches his peak in midsummer, but as the season progresses, he begins to weaken, his strength slowly giving way to the darker forces of the year. The festival of Lugnasad, held at the beginning of August, was both a celebration and a farewell, a recognition that the golden days of warmth and plenty would not last forever. This moment in the cycle teaches us one of the hardest lessons of all, that nothing, no matter how brilliant, can remain at its peak indefinitely. This is not a tragedy, but a truth woven into the fabric of existence. Just as the crops must ripen before they can be harvested, just as the sun must set before it can rise again, everything must pass through its cycle. But modern society has forgotten this lesson. We are conditioned to believe that success, power, and youth should last forever. We fight against decline, we cling to the idea of endless summer, we resist the natural ebb and flow of life. But to do so is to go against the rhythm of the world itself. The transition from summer to autumn reminds us that we must learn when to release, when to slow down, when to prepare for what is coming next. Those who refuse to acknowledge this shift, who continue to push forward as if the peak will never end, will find themselves unprepared when the cycle inevitably turns. Nature does not fear this change. The trees do not resist the fall of their leaves. The rivers do not fight the coming frost. And yet, as humans, we so often struggle with the idea that power, strength, and abundance must one day give way to something else. But the lesson of summer's fading days is this: the decline is not an end, it is a preparation, it is a transition, it is the necessary movement toward balance. The last golden days of summer are not a time to mourn what is passing, they are a time to honor what has been, to give thanks for what was given, and to recognize that what comes next is just as sacred. The sun has burned bright, but now its fire must begin to soften. The cycle turns, as it always has. Summer is a time of ascension. It represents the peak of light, warmth, and motion, the season when the world is at its most alive, expansive, and powerful. Yet in the grand cycle of existence, this peak is not a final destination. It is a fleeting moment, a brief pause at the height of a climb before the inevitable descent begins. This pattern is found everywhere, in nature, in civilizations, in personal growth, in spiritual awakening. It is the reason that no empire remains in power forever, that no fire can burn endlessly without consuming its fuel, that no person can sustain boundless energy without rest. Summer's lesson is not just about abundance, it is about understanding the responsibility that comes with power and the wisdom to know when to release it. Throughout esoteric traditions, The sun has been seen as a force of both enlightenment and destruction. It is the bringer of light, but too much light blinds. It is the source of life, but too much heat scorches. In the same way, summer represents both the reward of effort and the warning of excess. In alchemy, the stage of calcinatio is associated with fire, a burning away of impurities, a purification process that prepares a material for transformation. Just as the sun refines the world through heat, summer is a period of trial and refinement. Those who harness its energy with awareness can use it to create, grow, and expand. Those who misuse it may find themselves consumed by overindulgence, recklessness, or burnout. Many ancient wisdom traditions recognize this. The balance between light and shadow, creation and destruction, expansion and discipline is at the heart of all sustainable power. The tarot card associated with this lesson is the sun, a symbol of illumination, clarity, and achievement. It represents joy, success, and vibrancy, but it also serves as a reminder that even the brightest light casts a shadow. True wisdom comes not from burning at full intensity forever, but from learning how to channel that energy in a way that can be sustained. Summer, then, is a test of mastery. Can we harness its energy without being consumed by it? Can we use the fire of action and ambition while still remembering that all things must pass? Can we embrace our own peak moments, our own times of success and power, without falling into the illusion that they will last forever? Energy must be used wisely, not wasted. Growth must be honored, but so must the eventual decline, because the sun will not stay at its zenith. The descent is already beginning. But those who have mastered summer's fire will not fear the turning of the wheel. They will step forward, carrying its lessons with them, prepared for what comes next. Summer is the season of strength, expansion, and radiance, but it is also the season of reckoning. It reminds us that power, no matter how great, must be tempered. The sun does not burn at full intensity forever. The peak of energy is also the moment where the descent begins. To master summer is to understand the delicate balance between action and rest, between fire and stillness, between abundance and preparation. Those who ignore this balance, who push endlessly forward, believing that success and power are permanent, will find themselves unprepared when the cycle inevitably turns. The ancients did not worship the sun simply for its warmth and light. They honored it because they understood its lessons. They saw that fire could create or consume, depending on how it was wielded. They knew that true mastery was not found in endless expansion, but in knowing when to pause, when to gather strength, and when to let go. Summer's lesson is clear. Use your energy wisely. Burn bright, but do not burn out. Celebrate your victories, but do not cling to them. Recognize when you are at your peak, and instead of fearing the descent, prepare for the transition ahead. Because the sun, though it begins to wane, will rise again. And those who honor the sacred cycle will be ready for what comes next. The fire is fading. The shadows are growing longer. Autumn is approaching,